attendees that are just joining us, my name is Rudy Racine. I'm the Vice President of WeCARE Operations for Equus Workforce Solutions, and I am joined this afternoon by Mr. Bob Knight. Bob Knight is our Director of Government Relations with Equus Workforce Solutions. So, Bob, welcome again. And can you tell the audience, tell the attendees today a little bit about you and what you do for Equus?
Okay, just a little bit. I guess I'd start by saying when I was in graduate school a long time ago, I asked my advisor, who was an economist, and all economists consider themselves futurists. We might come back to that at some point. And I asked him how I could find a job. The economy in the early 70s was not great coming out of school. And he said, well, have you looked into manpower? And as push came to shove, I ended up getting an internship with Milwaukee County in their CETA program. Ever since, I've been a strong believer in internships, not just for high school kids or college kids, but post-college kids as well can benefit, or young adults by then can benefit from the experience. Anyhow, so I spent almost 10 years in Milwaukee, became the chief planner. And then I had an opportunity to go to work in Washington, D.C. for Gaylord Nelson, who was one of the senators from Wisconsin, and happened to be the head of the Employment, Poverty, and Migratory Labor Subcommittee, which did workforce back in the days when we still called it manpower. And that was an opportunity I'd been looking for 2 or 3 years, and it finally came true, only to have him lose the next election, at which point I did become the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Private Industry Councils, which became NAWB. I did that for 22 years. At that point, I decided, hey, I need to try the private sector for a little while. I went to work for Arbor E&T, which became ResCare, and we're now Equus, and it's been a great experience. So I never retired.
Awesome, awesome.
What I do for the company, just real quickly, is I track legislation. I do workshops and seminars. I'm still very interested in workforce boards, so I work with local customers and just colleagues in terms of how we can build effective business-led workforce boards. And I do whatever I'm asked to do.
Excellent. So now you talked about the legislative work that you do, and you're very entrenched in Washington, D.C. Now, COVID-19 started impacting many of our operations in late February, early March. And, we're almost 3 months in. What are some of the lessons that you feel like policymakers in D.C. have learned in the last 3 months?
Well, one that they learned to their chagrin to some degree was that our unemployment insurance system is ill prepared for a large influx of need. Now, in all fairness to that system, we'd never seen anything like this. So saying that it would have been geared up for what happened, but quite frankly, it wasn't geared up for something a lot smaller than that. We discovered, or at least finally legislators began to learn, that we have an absolutely outdated outdated technical system. Each state doesn't talk to other states. I mean, there were just dozens of problems with that system. Now, have they done anything to change it? Well, you can't change it on the fly, so you almost have to wait for good times to begin to make those investments. And historically, every time that happens, there's something better to spend money on. And so I guess the question is whether this time they might take seriously the advice of a variety of experts about how to take care of it. That's one. Two, I certainly think they've now learned that virtual distance learning is an important asset to have, and and the workforce system has to become much better. And it's something we at Equus have, not me, because I haven't had anything to do with it, but all of you have done a yeoman job of really bringing our company into the forefront of virtual services. So I think they've learned that they got to make sure they write the laws in ways that allow for that. The third thing is, maybe more recently, I think that they start to see that social justice is going to have to be part of the thinking that's central to how we think about workforce development. And that probably applies. I enjoyed the session earlier today with Glassdoor. The idea that there's an awful lot of people that have mid to lower mid-level jobs who also could make a lot more money if we move them up and one can do an equity strategy and looking at some areas there, but it means increasing resources. I guess the other thing we did learn, I guess I'd mention that real quickly, is yes, UI wasn't ready, but even us in the more direct career center business found that in a real crush, we're not big enough. We don't have enough money for the training that's going to be demanded, et cetera. So I think most people agree that we need a large investment in the coming months. Whether they can pull that off politically is a different question. We shall see.
So now you talked about the investment and just the different legislative responses. I know we've heard about the HEROES Act most recently, and prior to that, I forget the name of the act that came before it. But can you tell us a little bit about the HEROES Act and some of the legislative responses that we've seen thus far?
Well, the one you're mentioning is the CARES Act, which was $2 trillion. And then there was the CARES Act 2.0, which added another $500 billion or so, I don't know, a few $100 billion. So it was a huge program. And in it, I may have the wrong number, but it's about 345 million was available for workforce in the WIOA system. That's 345 million out of easily $2.5 trillion. So it's a tiny, tiny percentage of what's there. In the HEROES Act, we started with a bill in the House Education and Labor Committee, headed by Bobby Scott, the chairman from a Democrat from Virginia, and he put in, or his people and his committee put in, 15 billion as their recommended funding level, not just for WIOA, but WIOA and career and technical education, community colleges. There were a variety of users, but it was about 10 billion just for the WIOA system. That went over to the appropriations where the HEROES Act was finally put together, and 13 of the 15 billion disappeared. We ended up with 2 billion in that bill, and it passed the House easily. Now it's gone to the Senate where it's been declared dead on arrival, but I worked in Washington long enough to always see the party that's in power on one side always declares the power from the other side to be dead on arrival. I think what you have to realize is it lays sort of the ground rules for what we're going to negotiate. And the Senate, probably under the leadership of Senator McConnell and others, will have to come up with and will come up with a counter proposal. And from there, we'll negotiate. Now, the House bill is $3 trillion, and I think it's fair to say we're not going to see a $3 trillion bill. But it's also fair to say that the $600 UI enhancement probably is going to survive, but at a lower level, whether you want to pick 300, 350, or whatever. So I think we'll see that sometime toward the end of July into August. Things could go wrong, though. Anything that's not passed is not guaranteed.
So now the election, the general election is coming up in November. How are the upcoming elections impacting these legislative acts and policies?
My sense is they're going to make everybody reluctant to not do something. I mean, you don't want to go into an election and 2 months before that. I mean, we potentially have a massive loss of people on UI who will lose $600 a week in their paycheck. Now, whether that was the right amount or it was a mistake and it should have been less or more or whatever, you can argue that. But once it goes away entirely, you're going to have a ton of people. The average UI payment is around $400 in the country. So you're going to have people going from about an average of $1,000 down to an average of $400, which is not going to pay the rent, the mortgage, the grocery bill, the car note, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think either party wants to see that happen. And my guess is, while 600, the business community says is too much, they may well be right about that, but 0 is too little, and they're going to find some answer in between would be my prediction on that one.
Excellent. So now, Bob, obviously this audience consists of a number of workforce professionals, and they're seeing what's going on in DC. My next question is, what do you think workforce professionals should be paying close attention to in Washington, DC right now?
Well, one of the issues that I certainly pay attention to is whether we call them dislocated workers or not. It does appear very likely that tens of thousands of people who were laid off from their jobs are going to discover that their company no longer exists. So even if one is a total optimist and says we're going to have a V-shaped curve where everybody goes back to work, that's not going to happen. There are a lot of companies that aren't there, and while those little companies over a period of years will be rebuilt by them or other entrepreneurs, that's a long process. So we're going to have a lot of people in our doors, coming in our doors starting this late summer probably, but certainly by early next year. And I think we need to be prepared for it. We don't want to be caught with a bunch of news articles about we didn't know what to do. Now that, you know, people said we waited in line forever and we didn't get service. So we need to look at how we're going to serve people, how we're going to schedule. And a lot of us are. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we aren't, but I think we all need to. One bad story in this internet age goes everywhere. And we sort of know that that's going to be a change. The second one we sort of talked about, and that is, I think we're going to move quickly to virtual services. As I listened to some of the workshops at the NAWB conference today and yesterday, already you talk about people who were surprised at how quickly they could convert into a more virtual set of services than maybe they had thought was possible 6 months or 8 months ago. So that's the second change. Third change, I look for surprises, because every time we go through a period of significant change, there are some surprises. One that might come through is contact tracing. There's talk in the HEROES Act about letting the workforce board be a primary recruitment, training, and even hiring agent to put that in place. Now, it seems to me at this point, the states in many cases are moving too fast and the Congress isn't going to catch up in terms of what states are already doing and some localities are already doing. But nonetheless, that's a job creation opportunity that might exist, and we ought to pay attention to it going forward. The second one is, you know, the president has always believed in infrastructure, although it's a month before he was inaugurated, we were talking infrastructure, and here we are 3 months before an election, and we're still talking maybe we should have infrastructure. It may happen. I'd at least also have in my back pocket some thoughts about how we could help construction industries and related suppliers meet some of the needs if there is, in fact, a move towards some infrastructure investments, recognizing that they're pretty slow. In spite of the way people talk, they tend to take months to get going, so we would have time to work on that. The other thing I'd add is ongoing, and that is work-based learning. Work-based learning, I think, has caught the attention of the Congress. For some, it's apprenticeship, but it's a lot of other things. And it's my sense that a lot of members of Congress are going to want to know, how did we build the work-based learning process for young adults, for middle-aged adults, for career changers, and for dislocated workers? How did we lead the charge in that is, I think, going to be a challenge. And my sense is in a few places we're doing good, but for a variety of reasons, it's still easier to, one, do placement, or to send people to school. Those are still, in the minds of some, the most important things to do. And I think it's hard for our system to move as radically as it might want to towards a more work-based learning strategy.
Excellent. So, Bob, as we start to think about returning to the offices, and you know, with the unprecedented nature that COVID-19 has had on our operations, there's been a debate about, you know, whether or not to wear masks, or if masks should be mandated. I'm curious to know if you think the legislators will have any say in requiring masks within operations.
That's a good question. My guess is no. Remember, there are at least 3 bills that need to be reauthorized, and they're just going to be kicked down the road till next year. One is WIOA, the other is TANF, and the third is the Higher Education Act. One could put stipulations in any of those, but since they're not going to pass, it would be more or less meaningless at this point. I think what you'd have to see is somebody putting into the continuing resolution and/or appropriation bills this fall such requirements. my guess is it would be hotly contested and probably not succeed. So I don't think you'll see a requirement at the federal level. I could be wrong, but I don't think you will. But you may see states, governors, become stronger on requiring this in our centers. And you may see workforce boards that want to protect our employees and protect our customers and say that the only thing we know for sure right now is that masks provide some degree of protection from spreading the coronavirus.
Okay. Now you talked about UI, unemployment insurance. Where do you see that ending up?
If I had to be one of the reasons the economists like to be futurists is by the time when they make a prediction, I used to like to predict the outcome of elections that were 8 years from now because nobody would remember what I said by then. I think it's hard to say at this point. I guess I'm not. I'm probably somewhere between $300 and $400 going on some declining basis to the end of the year. Might be a guess of where things might end up. That or zero. I mean, I don't think zero is out of the question yet. I think 600 is out of the question going forward. And the other interesting part is whether some Republicans in particular have suggested a return to work bonus. And of course, there are others who find that anathema to a free enterprise system and the worst idea they've heard since guaranteed income. But my sense is that probably is a possible compromise piece that's kind of hard to figure out. But something's going to happen. There's going to be some funding in the mix going forward. The other piece is the payroll protection program in some slightly reduced format may also get some kind of extension. Otherwise, that ends today, which means employers who lay off those workers, we're going to see them in the UI roles in another week. And so that one, I guess, will happen, at least initially, unless there's a way to go back and change the past. I haven't seen that yet. So.
Now, you mentioned the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and I know some businesses have also explored EIDLs, right? Are you able to kind of discuss the difference between EIDL and the PPP?
Can I be honest and tell you no? I really can't. Even though I should be able to, I can't.
All good, all good. So any predictions around additional rounds of stimulus dollars to individuals or businesses?
Yeah, there's going to be at least one more stimulus. How big, I'm not sure, probably in the fall. And after that, I think we're going to see, we have an election, and we're going to be arguing about mail-in ballots until the very bitter end. We're going to see a lot of ads. The ads on both sides are going to make the other side cry foul. And if you're in the Congress, I think it's going to be very hard to get much of anything done. I think there will be either appropriations or more likely continuing resolutions that keep everything going, probably at least through the election, and into late November, early December, possibly, maybe at the end of the year. And so in a sense, if I look at a pandemic, the impact's going to go on. If we look at the Great Recession, the impact actually went on to what? The economists would tell us it was 2016 or thereabouts before we were totally out of the impacts. And for individuals, the impact goes on to this day. If we look at lifelong learning, lifelong income, we see income losses for people that are, in a certain sense, not recoverable. And so we're going to have long-term impacts. So I think this whole issue is going to carry over into next year and the next Congress and the next president or the current president for the next 4, whichever way that turns out. And I have a feeling it's going to influence our healthcare policy, our social service policy, our policing policy, our justice system policy. I mean, the impact is going to be enormous, and it'll affect our workforce development policy as well.
Thank you. So now, Bob, we've seen in the last couple of weeks a lot of emphasis on social justice initiatives, and there's been civil unrest. Talk to me about the impact that you think that is having on workforce and the industry as a whole.
Difficult in the short run to say for sure what the impact is versus what the impact will be. I look at this and I look back to the beginning of workforce, manpower, as I said at the beginning. And, you know, it was in the 60s, it was the war on poverty. And workforce development in its origins, even with Wagner-Pfizer, if we go back to the 30s, was focused on unemployed people in particular. In the 60s, it became people with what we today would call barriers. Back then, I think we just said poverty and systemic poverty. I think the interesting challenge that's going to come up, I mean, I still go to career centers where everybody talks about eligibility, in spite of the fact that for the adult program, while there is priority of service, there's not necessarily a hard eligibility line at all, and yet a lot of places, a lot of states still impose an eligibility. I think the issue here in terms of social justice is going to be, how do we balance needs in historically poor communities with needs for social justice that might reach out to a somewhat more prepared workforce. We know, for example, that people that go to work every day have a certain drive to work that we can take advantage of if we help them gain skills. And yet we tend to focus on people, by and large, by legislation, we focus on people with multiple barriers and or short-term needs that can be quickly filled. And I think if we want to really talk about changing the nature of work, we're going to have to come up with strategies that stay with people for extended periods, that help people who are in lower level, middle class jobs, if you can call them that, mid-skill, lower skill jobs, gain the skills to get better jobs. And that's not something that happens with a quick entry-exit strategy. And so we're going to have to, I think, move away from the idea that we have people in and people out, and begin to think of ourselves as the library. I always tell people, nobody kicks you out of the library because you didn't take a book for a couple of weeks or years. You still have your library card, it's still honored. I think we're going to have to start seeing some piece of this as being a customer flow of people who are moving up into the middle class, who can support their children better, buy better housing, participate in the economy, and how we in the workforce system play a role in that, because it's also a community college, higher education, and ultimately a company business decision in how to invest. I mean, one of the things we know for certain is that companies, by and large, have reduced the investment they make in their frontline workforce over the years. They invest less. They've pushed that off to the government to spend that money. That's not necessarily a bad thing, possibly, but it is something that we have to look at. And I think it's a place where social justice suggests a much broader approach to workforce than just an anti-poverty antidote. Some places we're doing that, but I think we're still seeing, I like to say to people, you go into most cities and you say, where's the career center? And everybody looks at you with a blank stare, but if you said, where's the UI office, they can tell you right where the career center is. And we haven't been able to get by that in many, many communities. We have in some, but we haven't in many. I don't think it's necessarily our fault. It's also a structure of how we run our programs, as we're required to some degree by the law. And it's also, I think, and I'd say this is the challenge to all the workforce board members, it's also a fact that we don't take advantage of the flexibility that actually is in the law to try some innovative new things, that we just sort of think you can't do that without really looking into it. Sort of a long-winded answer.
No, it was a great answer. It was a great answer, Bob. So now we're seeing spikes of COVID in different parts of the country right now. How do you think those spikes are going to potentially impact our offices reopening?
In some state, you know, I guess Hey, I'm of the opinion I would not go to a career center right now because I could do anything they can do for me online. I don't need to go there. I can even talk to a counselor, excuse me, online. And I would, and I think some of our centers are, encourage people to use those modalities, if you will, rather than coming to the office. But those who must come, I think we'll do a little better at being open for them than probably we have over the last 3 months. But some states may go backward now. Texas, Florida, California are all talking about moving back, taking one step backward now. And it may be that we're going to be asked to close. I don't know. There are people in our company, as you know, Rudy, you're one of them, who can probably answer that better than I can. But I do think it's an important piece of public policy as to whether we're open or not. Because certainly for some people, there are a lot of our customers who do not have access to talking to us on the computer, do not even understand how to do that in some cases if they did have access. You know, I would put one aside plug in here though, and that is when the libraries reopen, where they open. I still think trying to build our career centers into libraries is a fantastic idea, and one that's been done in Las Vegas and some other places with great impact. It's opening people up to more options, which I think is where the post-COVID-19 era is going to be, is how can we create more options for people to get online, physical as well as virtual.
Thank you. So Bob, it looks like we are almost at time. I want to give you one last opportunity, to address some of our conference attendees. Is there anything that you want to leave with our attendees that we didn't get to discuss while you were here?
No, I'd say something.
Wait. Rudy.
Uh-oh, Ron's up.
No. Wait. Before
Okay,
you do that, you so let him off the hook. You so when he took the pass and said, well, that could be an issue, Rudy, for the next president or this president and the next. Like, you can't let him off the hook like that. You got to come back to Bob. We're at July 4th. Labor Day is going to be here pretty soon. We're going to roll into. What do you see? And we talk about this a lot. It's a long time to November. What do you think we're going to be talking about October, November?
Oh, tough question.
Because of course, Rudy can't ask you that tough question because he has to work with you. I get to ask him.
I'm not sure it'll be unemployment partly. I think that we're going to have double-digit unemployment for quite a while. And it's kind of a weird world because we had almost no unemployment just half a year ago, less than half a year ago. So I think that'll be one. Most elections boil down to, a fairly narrow set of things. One is, are we better off than we were, at some time ago? Well, the president will lose that one, I think. But there's also do you think the world will be better in a year? And he might at least get a draw on that one. And then foreign affairs, foreign policy stuff. All this stuff about the Russians having, bounties on killing American troops, whether true or not, can dominate an election in the late stages. It's a good thing that for the president, I think that it's happening now and not later. But I would have to guess that unemployment and social, and then the whole social pro or con, the whole social justice issues are going to continue well into the election, and how it'll split voters, hard to say. All of these things are. I will make one prediction. There were, Ron, I've told you this one. There were 3.
And I talk to Jaime Cruz on a regular basis, so I'm taking this bet to Vegas.
Okay, do. No, well, I'm not going to predict who's going to win the election. If the election were held today, I could probably predict it, but it ain't held today. Anybody who tells you they know that's crazy. Lying, cheating, they want to get your bet in. No, I was going to say that the thing that I'm confident of is that either a greatest generation or a baby boomer will be our next president. Unless there's a huge write-in for me, but then I'm still a baby boomer, so what do we do?
Rudy, I did not mean to jump into your conversation like it was like this was the, studio wrestling or whatever, but I just couldn't let Bob off the hook. And I did want to say it is great to see you, Bob, on behalf of like a whole lot of us who have relied on you for friendship and mentorship through a lifetime in this business. It is great to see you. I hope we soon get to grab coffee again at that unnamed place we go to because they're not a sponsor.
Let me just say, it was one of the great joys of my life to work for the National Association of Workforce Boards, and before it, NAWB. And I respect all the work that you're doing now, Ron, to carry on a wonderful tradition. I love the organization, I always will. And it's a pleasure to be here, even if only virtually from my little office here in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Awesome.
But thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. And Ron, you're always, this is your conference. We appreciate you joining the interview. Thank you. So now, Bob, you know what you're doing, right? You're going to click stop video and stop audio, and then we're good to go. Thank you all for your attention.